Authorities in northwest China's Shanxi province say they may seek a civil claim for compensation for the damage done to a terracotta warrior statue.
In 1974, a group of farmers digging a well in rural China accidentally broke open one of the greatest secrets in human history. They pulled up fragments of clay arms, clay armor, and a human face staring blankly up at them through 2,000 years of packed soil. Nobody knew what they were holding. Nobody could have guessed. What archaeologists eventually uncovered beneath that dried-out field would become one of the most celebrated archaeological discoveries of the 20th century.
It really indicates that this was a short-range kill.
Over 8,000 life-sized clay soldiers, 670 horses, 130 chariots, all standing in perfect battle formation.
What we've discovered so far through these 3D models, these warriors seem to be very individual, in the same way as a typical human population.
Sealed underground in complete darkness for more than 2 millennia, the world looked at it and called it a wonder, a masterpiece, a monument to the ambition of China's first emperor. For 50 years, that is what it was.
Chen Shi Huang is literally the first emperor in China.
A marvel, something to admire from behind a rope barrier. Then AI finished scanning it, and the word that keeps coming up in the research rooms afterward is not wonder. It is not masterpiece. The word is warning.
8,000 warriors buried over 2,000 years ago. One of the greatest wonders of the world.
Stay with this until the end, because what was found beneath these soldiers, inside their weapons, hidden in their clay, and still buried in the ground beneath sections of this site that nobody has touched in 50 years, that is not the story anyone was telling about the Terracotta Army. And once you hear it, the story you were told before will feel thin. The man who ordered it built. Before you can understand what AI found, you need to understand who built this and why. Because the Terracotta Army does not exist in a vacuum. It is the product of one specific mind, shaped by one specific obsession, carried out by methods that the history books have softened considerably. Qin Shi Huang was China's first emperor. By the time he was 38 years old, he had conquered every rival kingdom on the Chinese subcontinent and unified the entire region under a single rule for the first time in recorded history. The man was, by any military and political measure, one of the most consequential human beings who ever lived. What he built, a centralized empire with standardized currency, standardized writing, and a vast road network, laid foundations that still shape China today. But here is the part that tends to get left out of the introductory version. The methods Qin Shi Huang used to build that empire were not the kind that get discussed in polite company. His generals buried surrendered soldiers alive, hundreds of thousands of them, as a deliberate strategy to break the psychological resistance of the kingdoms that followed. He ordered books burned, not metaphorically, physically. Works of philosophy, history, and scholarship that challenged his authority were collected and destroyed, and according to historical accounts, the scholars who wrote them were buried alive alongside the texts they refused to renounce. Cities that resisted were massacred. Alliances were made and discarded the moment they stopped serving him. And in his final years, this man who had conquered everything became consumed by the one thing he could not conquer. He did not want to die. He sent ships across the seas searching for an elixir of immortality. He refused to sleep in the same palace 2 consecutive nights, terrified of assassination. Alchemists fed him compounds of mercury, promising it would make him live forever. The mercury rotted his mind instead, accelerating the paranoia, the executions, the delusions, while he continued issuing orders and having anyone who failed him killed. The Terracotta Army was built during these years, 8,000 soldiers to guard him in death. Built by people who, ancient texts record this clearly, were not going to be allowed to leave when the work was done. Hold that detail, because AI just found the evidence that it was true. What the AI found first. They were never gray. The first thing AI revealed about the Terracotta army seems almost small compared to what follows. But it matters because it tells you something about how wrong we have been looking at this site. And for how long. For 50 years, the image everyone carries in their head of these warriors is the same. Gray clay. Row after row of colorless, dusty soldiers, worn down by time, silent and monochrome. That is the Terracotta army that has been photographed a billion times. That is the image on every textbook cover, every documentary poster, every tourist photograph. That image is wrong. It was always wrong. Using hyperspectral imaging technology, cameras calibrated to see far beyond the wavelengths the human eye can detect, the AI scanned the surface of the figures and found chemical ghost traces of pigment that had long since faded and flaked from view. Cinnabar red, malachite green, azurite blue, charcoal black. The AI read these residue signatures and reconstructed what these soldiers originally looked like. The research team watched the reconstruction appear on their screens, and what they saw was not what 50 years of archaeology had prepared them for. These were not gray clay statues. They were soldiers. Vivid, brightly painted, disturbingly lifelike soldiers with colored armor, detailed skin tones, individually rendered features, and eyes that looked, and the team used this word specifically, like they were about to move. Several researchers described the experience as unsettling in a way they had not expected. Not because the colors were beautiful, because the soldiers suddenly felt alive, because 2,000 years of grime and oxidation had been the only thing standing between a modern human being and direct eye contact with an army from the 3rd century BC. And the AI stripped that barrier away. This army was never designed to be archaeological. It was not built to impress future visitors behind glass barriers. It was designed to be real, a real military force, painted to look like living soldiers, positioned in real battle formation, armed and waiting. And that was just the beginning. The fingerprints of men who never came home. As the AI continued processing its scans across the figures, it began detecting something embedded in the surface of the clay itself. Not on the outside, not decoration, but pressed into the material during construction. Fingerprints, thousands of them, different on every statue, preserved in the fired clay for over 2,000 years, as clear and distinct as the day they were made. Every single print belonged to a different worker. The people who physically shaped these soldiers, who pushed their thumbs into wet clay and smoothed the surface and pressed the features into place. Their hands are still here. Their identity may be lost. Their names may never be known. But the proof that they existed, that they stood in workshops and held this clay and shaped it with their bare hands, is preserved in every figure across this site. Think about what that means for a moment. 2,000 years. The Roman Empire rose and fell. Entire languages died. Entire civilizations that were flourishing when these figures were built have vanished without a trace. And these fingerprints are still here. But the AI did not stop at identifying the prints. It analyzed the clay composition across different figures, and what it found told a story about how this project changed as it went on. The earliest figures, the ones produced in the opening years of construction, were shaped by skilled artisans. The clay was consistent, carefully sourced, the technique controlled and deliberate. You can see the craftsmanship in the fine detail of the faces, the careful rendering of armor plates, the individual expression of each figure. Then the project expanded, and the clay changed. Later figures showed coarser material pulled from different sources, blended inconsistently, worked with less precision. The fingerprints in these figures carry a different signature. Rougher pressure patterns, less controlled technique, the marks of workers who had never shaped clay in their lives. Peasants pulled from agricultural labor, prisoners given no choice, people conscripted under urgency as the emperor's timeline shortened and his temper worsened, and the workforce had to grow faster than it could be trained. And then there is the question of what happened when the work was finished. Sima Qian, the great Han Dynasty historian writing roughly a century after the tomb was sealed, recorded something specific in his Records of the Grand Historian. The craftsmen who built the inner chambers, the people who knew the layout, who knew the traps, who knew the exact location of every corridor and every treasure, were locked inside when construction was complete. The doors were sealed with them still inside. They knew too much to be allowed to walk away. For 2,000 years, that passage existed as a historical claim in an ancient book. Something that might be true, might be exaggeration, might be the kind of dramatic detail that ancient writers added to make powerful rulers seem more powerful and terrible. The fingerprints in the clay are proof that real human hands built this place. They are proof that real people stood in these pits, day after day, for years, shaping an army in the dark. The question that AI is now helping to answer is how many of those people were still inside when the torches went out and the doors were closed. Hidden chambers nobody was supposed to find. Ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry were deployed across large sections of the site. Not the excavated pits, but the areas in between and beyond them. Areas marked on official archaeological maps as empty ground.
Of course, what he didn't know was that this was actually the most important archaeological finding in China of the last 100 years.
Areas where nobody had dug and nobody had expected to find anything. The raw data was fed into AI systems trained to identify density anomalies and magnetic variation patterns in subsurface readings. What came back from beneath Pit 2 stopped the team cold. Straight corridors, rectangular chambers, enclosed rooms too organized to be geological, too deliberate to be anything other than constructed. Structures built underground and then buried in areas the official maps showed as undisturbed earth. Some of these passages extended well beyond the known boundaries of the site. The layout matched nothing in any known burial design from the Qin period. It did not look like a tomb. It did not look like a storage complex. The layout, the orientation, the scale. It looked like a command structure. A military installation recreated underground and designed, not to honor the emperor after death, but to function, to operate, as if whoever built it believed it would actually be used. Ancient texts describe the emperor's tomb as a miniature empire. Palaces, government offices, rivers of mercury flowing through engineered underground channels. Historians have read these descriptions for centuries and assumed they were poetic exaggeration, the kind of hyperbolic language ancient writers used to frame powerful rulers as godlike, the kind of thing you say about a man to make him seem larger than life. The AI sensor data suggests it was a literal description. The Terracotta army may not be symbolic at all. It may be a full-scale, operationally accurate recreation of the actual Qin military system, the real chain of command, the real unit structure, the real battle formations of the empire that conquered China, rebuilt in clay and buried so it could continue functioning in whatever came after death. That is not a monument to a dead man. That is something else entirely. Something that says its builder genuinely believed death was not the end of the campaign. The writing nobody had read. For decades, archaeologists had noticed small markings on many of the figures.
Tomb builders here were so intent on getting everything perfect for their prints.
Tiny etchings pressed into clay at the feet, along torsos, across armor plates and bases. Everyone assumed they were what they looked like: workshop labels, production codes, the bureaucratic markings of a large-scale manufacturing operation trying to track thousands of pieces across multiple production sites, inventory numbers, nothing more. The AI read them properly for the first time. They were not production codes. They were military records, unit designations, battalion identifiers, rank inscriptions, the names of individual artisans assigned to specific figures. A complete administrative military record pressed into the clay of every soldier across the site. But that was not the part that silenced the room. Buried inside the data, cross-referenced across multiple figures, The AI identified references to units that do not appear anywhere in the known archaeological record. Labels for entire soldier groups, complete battalions, full unit designations that correspond to no figures that have ever been excavated. Not damaged figures, not displaced figures, simply absent ones. They are still down there. Hundreds of figures, possibly thousands. Terracotta soldiers still standing in full formation, still carrying their weapons, still organized by unit, still waiting in undocumented pits beneath sections of a site that has been actively excavated for 50 years. The researchers who heard this finding described a specific physical reaction, a chill that moved through the room. These were archaeologists who had spent entire careers on this site. Some of them had devoted 30 years to this ground, and the AI had just told them that what they found, the 8,000 soldiers, the horses, the chariots, the 3 excavated pits, was not the whole army. It was not even close to the whole army. Think about that. 50 years of excavation, thousands of researchers, millions of visitors, and somewhere beneath the ground you walk on when you visit this site, there are battalions of soldiers that no living person has ever seen. The weapons were real. Throughout the excavated pits, archaeologists had consistently found bronze weapons alongside the figures, swords, spears, crossbow trigger mechanisms. For 50 years, the working assumption was that these were ceremonial replicas, burial props made to look functional, realistic enough to impress, but not actual weapons, grave goods. The kind of thing ancient cultures buried with the dead as symbolic provision. The AI looked closer, much closer, tiny nicks along blade surfaces, consistent with impact against other metal or bone, polish marks from repeated sharpening, not once, not twice, but evidence of extended maintenance over time. Wear patterns distributed along the edges and flats in the specific way that comes from actual use in combat, not from manufacture or handling. These weapons had been used, they had been maintained, and they had been used again. Before they were buried here, these were real weapons carried by real soldiers in real battles. They were not made for this tomb. They were stripped from living soldiers and sealed underground with the dead. And then there was the coating. Many of the blades were covered in a rust prevention treatment, chromium oxide, applied with a consistency and effectiveness that has kept these bronze weapons in near-perfect condition after 2 millennia underground. The problem is that chromium plating as a metal treatment was not developed in the Western world until the early 20th century. How a Qin dynasty weapons manufacturer operating in 200 BC was applying a functionally equivalent treatment remains one of the open questions that AI has flagged but cannot yet answer. But the real implication here is darker than the metallurgy. Qin Shi Huang took weapons that had drawn blood, weapons that had been carried through the campaigns that built his empire, and he buried them to arm the ghost soldiers standing guard over him in death. Not replicas, not symbols. Real weapons, battle-tested and preserved, because he believed, genuinely, obsessively believed, that the wars were not over, that the enemies he had defeated in life were waiting for him somewhere beyond it, and he was not going to face them without an army at his back. He was not building a monument, he was preparing for a war. What was found beneath the soldiers? This is the finding that cleared every room it was presented in. In several locations across the site, the AI ground scans flagged anomalies in the soil directly beneath and beside the terracotta figures. Not below the architectural structures, not in the corridors or the chambers, directly under and beside the soldiers themselves. Irregular shapes, organic density signatures in the soil, the specific chemical profile that decomposed organic material leaves in compacted earth over long periods of time. When those locations were carefully excavated, the findings confirmed what the ancient texts had recorded for 2,000 years, and what every reasonable person had hoped was exaggeration. Human remains. Young adults, some estimated to have been in their 20s when they died. The bones were not arranged with care. They were not positioned in any way that suggested ceremony, intention, or respect for the dead. They were scattered, disorganized, found in positions that archaeologists, choosing their words carefully in their reports, described as inconsistent with natural death and inconsistent with deliberate burial. The positioning, the ages, the locations, directly within the military complex, surrounded by the soldiers they had built, matched exactly what ancient accounts described as the fate of workers sealed inside to protect the emperor's secrets, and the attendants sacrificed to serve him in death. Human beings treated as one more category of construction material in an immortality project that had no ceiling on what it was willing to consume. For 2,000 years, this was a passage in Sima Qian's history. Words on a page, a claim that you could accept or set aside. Now it has bones, and the AI scans indicate there are more anomalies still in the ground. More density signatures in sections that have not yet been excavated. More of them. Waiting. The general who was never supposed to be found. Near the central axis of Pit 1, an area that had been considered fully excavated, documented, and closed, the AI ground scans detected a faint density pattern beneath a section of collapsed earth that matched no known figure in the official archaeological record. It was subtle enough that it had been missed for 50 years of manual survey work. The AI flagged it as anomalous. The team excavated carefully, and what came out of the ground had not been seen in half a century of work on this site. A figure, but not like the others, taller than every soldier surrounding it, broader. The armor was different, chest plates layered and segmented with a complexity far beyond standard infantry rank. The belt hardware and headgear carried insignia that, when cross-referenced against known Qin military records, pointed to one rank specifically. General. Researchers ran the evidence against every available reference. The armor construction, the insignia style, the physical scale, the location within the pit relative to surrounding unit formations. One name came back repeatedly from the cross-referencing process: Meng Tian, the most feared and accomplished military commander in the Qin Empire. The man who directed construction of significant sections of the Great Wall of China and who led the campaigns that secured China's northern border, through methods that reportedly made even other Qin generals uncomfortable. If the identification holds, and researchers are being careful to say it is still under analysis, this would be the first time a specific named historical individual has been positively identified within the Terracotta army. Not a symbolic figure, not a generic type. A real person, recreated in clay, standing guard over the emperor he served. A few feet from the figure, the AI reconstruction team found the shattered remains of a chariot. They pieced it together digitally from the fragments. The axles showed stress fractures from long use. The wheel surfaces bore terrain abrasion consistent with hard ground over extended distance. The harness fittings carried scrape marks from years of actual load-bearing. This chariot had been to war. It was not manufactured for burial. It was taken, stripped from active military service, and sealed underground alongside the general who rode it. Let that image stay with you for a moment. A real chariot, worn from real campaigns, buried with a clay recreation of the general who commanded the army that won those campaigns, standing guard in the dark for 2,000 years over the emperor who sent them both into the ground. The tomb that has never been opened. Everything AI has found. The hidden chambers, the unread inscriptions, the real weapons, the human remains, the buried general. All of it is from the outer edges of the site, the peripheral pits, the sections that could be safely reached and excavated. At the center of all of it, there is a mound, 250 meters high, an artificial hill that has sat at the heart of this site since construction was completed in approximately 210 BC. Beneath it, according to ancient texts and confirmed by every modern sensor array that has been pointed at it, lies the actual burial chamber of Qin Shi Huang, the inner tomb, the place everything else was built to protect and serve. It has never been opened, not once, not in 50 years of excavation surrounding it. Soil samples taken above the mound show mercury concentration levels hundreds of times above normal background. The readings align precisely with Sima Qian's description of rivers of liquid mercury engineered to flow through the burial chambers. Rivers designed, presumably, to represent the great waterways of the empire the emperor refused to stop ruling even after death. There is enough mercury in the ground beneath that mound to make excavation genuinely dangerous to anyone who tries it. And perhaps that is why it has not been opened. Or perhaps the decision is more deliberate than that. Chinese authorities have declined to excavate the central tomb, citing preservation concerns. The worry that what has been sealed and protected for 2,000 years would be damaged by exposure. That the technology to excavate without destroying does not exist yet. What is almost certainly inside has been described in detail by ancient writers. Palaces recreated in miniature, a ceiling mapped with stars, crossbow mechanisms engineered to fire automatically at anyone who enters without authorization, traps still potentially armed and waiting inside a sealed chamber after 21 centuries, treasures on a scale that makes everything recovered from the outer pits look like a preview. Nobody has gone in. Nobody living has any direct knowledge of what is actually in there. Every claim about the interior of that tomb is second-hand, filtered through writers who heard it from people who heard it from people who may have seen it once, briefly, before the doors were sealed and the hill was piled on top. What AI has found in the areas that could be examined has already forced a rewrite of what historians thought they understood about the ancient world. The weapons were real. The hidden soldiers are still down there. The human remains confirmed what nobody wanted to believe was literal. A specific named general has potentially been identified inside the pit for the first time. And that is all from the edges, from the parts they could reach. The center has not been touched. What this changes. In 1 year of AI-assisted analysis, researchers reported learning more about the Terracotta army than in the previous 50 years of conventional excavation combined. That is not a promotional claim. That is what the research team said in documentation. Think about what that ratio means. 50 years of human effort, some of the best archaeologists in the world working this site decade after decade, and a single year of AI analysis produced comparable or greater volume of discovery. The colors restored to figures that were thought to be perpetually gray. The fingerprints of workers pressed into clay 2 millennia ago, now readable and catalogued. The clay composition shifts that revealed how the workforce changed and suffered as the project expanded under pressure. The hidden chambers beneath Pit 2 extending beyond the known boundaries of the site. The military records embedded in the figures identifying units that have never been excavated. The real weapons confirming the emperor believed he was going to war in the afterlife. The human remains confirming that the stories about people sealed inside were not stories. The general nobody knew was in there, standing in formation, still waiting. And somewhere down there, thousands of soldiers still in their pits. And at the center, an unopened door. Here is the question that does not have an easy answer. If this is what surrounds the tomb, if this is what the outer ring of the site looks like after AI analysis, what is the inner chamber? What did the man who did all of this keep for himself? What was worth all of it? The conquered kingdoms, the burned books, the buried scholars, the mercury, the soldiers sealed in the dark, the workers locked inside. What was the thing at the center of all of it that he was protecting with everything he had? That question has waited 2,000 years. It is still waiting. What do you think is inside that tomb? Drop your answer in the comments below. The range of what people speculate is worth reading on its own, and some of those speculations are going to seem a lot less far-fetched once you have watched this video through once. If what AI found around the edges of this site already rewrites the history of the ancient world, then the sealed chamber at its center may be the single most significant unopened space on Earth right now. Every technology that found the hidden chambers, identified the real weapons, read the unreadable inscriptions, and located the buried general. All of that same technology is pointed at the mound, reading it, mapping it, waiting for the day when the excavation question gets a different answer. That day is coming, and when it does, the Terracotta Army will stop being the story. It will become the prologue to something larger. Next week, the Great Pyramid. AI thermal imaging has located sealed chambers inside it that no living person has ever entered. The readings are anomalous in ways that the team conducting the survey has been very careful about how they describe publicly. Subscribe so you are here when that one drops. You will not want to hear about it secondhand.